And this is about understanding complexity. And again, I'm not going to talk about complexity. It's fundamentally rooted in Shannon information theory and understanding something called the space of possibilities. I want to talk about the concept of specialists. And I want to talk about it in the context that we are all familiar with medical specialties. So if you go to the doctor, usually you go to what's called in different places different names, but a general practitioner, a family doctor, whatever. They will take a look at you and they will send you to one of a number of specialists. How many specialists are there? Well, it turns out that there is an increasing number of specialists. And the question is, why are there specialists? When you have a problem in front of you, you really want to understand basics. Ask the question why about obvious things. Why are there specialists? Can anyone answer me why there are specialists?
Well, I think that should be because of their prior knowledge, studies, and experiences relatively focused on a particular subject.
Very good. The answer is complexity. Okay? What is the relationship between the word complexity and what you said? Let me explain. If there was just one thing to know, you don't need specialists.
Yep.
The reason that you need specialists is because there's more than one thing to know. In fact, there are many things to know. So you need particular information in order to deal with a particular situation. So complexity is measured in terms of the set of possibilities. Again, if there was only one possibility or two or three or four possibilities, you could have one type of doctor. But there are thousands and thousands of different possible things that can happen. And let's just take a number. I'm not going to justify it now. But let's say there are 10,000 possibilities that one person can know, and that's all they can know. Then this person can deal with 10,000 possible things. This person can deal with 10,000 possible things, and so on. So if you have n specialists, you can deal with n times 10,000 possibilities. Is that clear? So let's say there are 5 specialists. They can deal with 50,000 possibilities. And that's a lot more than 10,000. Okay, very clear. Well, so how many specialists do we have? The answer is hundreds. So there are hundreds of 10,000 possibilities. And there are increasingly many specialists. Now there's, instead of just a surgeon, there's a hand surgeon and a foot surgeon. You got it? Okay. So here's the next idea. What happens if we put them together in a team? How many possible things can they do? We have these 5 specialists. How many possibilities can they deal with? So the answer is they can deal with 10,000 times 10,000 times 10,000 times 10,000 times 10,000. How much is that?
Very big.
Pretty big, right? It's 10 to the 20th. How much bigger is 10 to the 20th from 50,000? A lot. So why does this happen? And the answer is that if you look at the space of possibilities, it works like this. If you have 2, and here I've not done 10,000, I've done 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You have 7 possibilities for one and 7 possibilities for the other, so you have 14. And here you just have 2 people, so you have 7 and 7. But if you combine them together, they can have 49 possibilities. Huge. So here's the thing. If you only have a few possibilities, you can have one person do it. If you have more than one person can deal with, you can have specialists. But if you have a lot more possibilities, you must have teams. Must. There's no other way. So let's talk about what's happening in society. What's happening in society, and again, I'm not going to justify all of the things. There is a course that's coming up if you want to attend it. I just want to give the ideas and then we can talk about them. We used to have in society something called hierarchies. If you were in a hierarchy and you wanted to talk to someone down the hall, you had to talk to your boss, they talked to their boss, the boss talked to the person down the, and somebody else and so on. And that's how communication went. Now, if you notice and you think about it for a minute, this is a bandwidth limiting system, right? Because the communication from these people to these people or these people, all of it has to go through this person. So you can think about this as a bandwidth limited system, or you can think about this as a complexity limited system, which is basically the same thing. So this statement about the limits of complexity, it's important. The reason that society could have hierarchical systems in the past is because it wasn't complex enough. But what we've seen in the last several decades is that hierarchical systems fail. You wouldn't make teams if hierarchical systems worked. The reason you wouldn't make them, is it clear why? Because they're complex. You only make complex systems to deal with complex environments. That's the only reason. There's no other reason to make systems complex. Because it's hard. So the bottom line is, it is manifest that the world is facing a complexity transition. And this is a diagram that you can find in a paper called Complexity Rising. I don't know if someone sent you this paper, maybe you did. If you look up Complexity Rising online, you will find this paper. Basically, the collective complexity of civilization has been increasing over time, and we've been crossing this boundary, which is the boundary between an individual's complexity across the individual's complexity. And once you get beyond this boundary, you have to have teams. No choice. So we must have teams. Systems are failing. And so the future is teams. Now, having said that it's obvious, I want to talk about the rest of the things that you've asked me. And then we'll open for questions. Because there were two statements. I'd like to learn about X and I'd like to learn about Y. And I have a few things to say about each of them. One of them was, okay, so how do we make teams? And the answer is, there are some things that I can say, such as the set of individuals has to have different capabilities. Even that, by the way, has limited utility because there's also scale. We haven't talked about scale here, but you need both scale and complexity, so you have to use both. But you want, for complexity, you definitely have to have different capabilities that are complementary. Okay? The second is that they have to actually work together. So there's a difference between teams that are voting. I'm voting for this, you're voting for that. That's not a team, that's a committee. A team is some people who actually work together to solve a problem, to engage in the same challenge. But the mechanisms by which they do that are not clear. So here's something I can say about what we can't know. Teams are complex. Remember, this is the boundary of the complexity of the individual. So if you ask me to tell you how to make a team, I know I can't do that. And neither can any one of you. So the challenge of making teams is a fundamental challenge. It's not a superficial one. The fact that it's hard to make teams, I said, no one would make complex systems unless it was necessary. And the answer is because it's hard. And we can talk about it a lot if you want, but the ultimate question is you can't engineer it. You have to figure it out by experience. That doesn't mean that thinking about it doesn't help. It does, but we have to work on it by experience. Which means that, as you know, fail fast and all of those kinds of things. And learn. The second thing that I was asked about was about trust. So what do we know about building trust? So one of the critical things here is that if person A knows something different than person B, they actually can't evaluate what the person B knows. So what that says is that a team has to be based upon trust, but it's actually very difficult to build it. You see why? So the answer is you have to build it by actually experience by working together. And that's super hard. So you see how this interplay of what we can know and what we can't know plays out. But what I can say unequivocally is that we need to appreciate the differences between individuals that we cannot even understand. And that includes all kinds of differences in terms of specific knowledge, in terms of the way someone approaches a problem, in terms of the cognitive aspects of emotions and cognition, because everything is part of this, right? And in particular, figuring all this out leads to a need to understand teams, but it's not enough. Teams of teams, absolutely. And ultimately, I can tell you that I can prove mathematically that the substructure of a system cannot have more than a limited number of teams, like 7 plus or minus 2. So you need to have a substructure that starts at the large scale and then continues to have substructural components down to a fine scale. There are caveats. Again, I've been talking about complexity and not scale itself, which we have to talk about, but that's a beginning of an introduction to a very deep inquiry that has to apply all of the power of our understanding, both from experience and from analytic understanding of complexity. And that's where I think I'll stop.
Professor, you said, maybe I may have misunderstood it, but we can't build teams. I took it like there's no easy math of building a team, but eventually a complex organization, let's say, or a complex societal context is eventually adapted to certain dynamics, certain inputs, and we can kind of engineer certain inputs to which the complex system can respond in a relatively more predictable way, can't we?
The answer is, I don't say we can't build teams. We can't know how to build teams to be successful by analysis. What that means is that we have to do it. They're not going to happen spontaneously. Self-organization is not the thing. It's us. We are us building teams. So the answer is we have to build teams. It's not that we can't. We have to. But we cannot know that a particular idea about how they will be effective will be successful.
Oh, okay.
Unless we try it out.
So we shouldn't treat any kind of administrative managerial tricks or leadership tricks as a silver bullet that does the job.
No. How do I say this? There are two parts of it. One is that complexity means you can't figure it out because there are too many possibilities to analyze. But a way to understand it really is that it's not universal. In other words, there's no universal idea about how teams work. It's all contextual. So throw out the McKinsey handbook because the McKinsey cannot tell you what the best practices are. There is no universal best practices. And that's how people try to figure things out. They come up with they tell you, do this and this and this, and it'll work. But it cannot work because it cannot work in your context. That doesn't mean that there aren't going to be ways of understanding how things should be organized in relation to particular environmental contexts. That's possible. Okay, and that's kind of the next level of engagement in this effort. Go ahead.
Thank you. So for context, the reason I joined this session is I co-founded a startup at the beginning of the year. And I find myself at the top of that triangle you just showed. So I want to get out of that position, even though I don't want to be there. I think people's habits and the way we think, and probably the way I also operate time to time, pushes me up there. So my question is not specifically how to get out of there. I mean, I think we have the answer. It's something you do and figure out. But my worry usually is, so as a startup, limited resources, we are dead by default, as they call it, because we are not making profits yet. I want to ensure as much as possible that our efforts as a teams of teams is pulling us towards same direction as much as possible. I don't want teams to go this way, but I also don't expect them to go this way, maybe closer. So how do we, what are some principles that might help with it?
It has to be about a team of teams.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not about doing the same thing, right? And this is obvious. I'm sure you understand this. If you think about a team as a basketball team, each one member of the team does something else, but they work together. And this is a model for how to think about how teams function. But you know this, right? Because you have different pieces of the organization that are doing different things. They are working together, but how to coordinate them. But the point is that it's hard. Let me tell you something about my experience recently. In the private sector, the development of teams has been going on for 40 years. In the public sector, in the public goods sector, it has stagnated. In fact, if anything, the situation has become more and more centralized. So the healthcare system, the education system, all of them have become more centralized, and even governance structures have become more centralized. If you look at the way the US government is working, or the UK government, it's actually become more centralized over time. And the reason is that there isn't a selection pressure on those systems. The selection pressure for success doesn't work in a public good context. And because of that, the public good sector has become less and less effective at dealing with the challenges that it's facing. And this is obvious in the context of the pandemic, but if you go back a few years, you'll see that it's been failure after failure after failure. And this is why I wrote this paper, the Teams Manifesto, because what you see is that there is a tremendous rejection And it's not necessarily the people in this room, but the society is rejecting its leadership, right? They're seeking extremes who can satisfy their need for something to solve the problems that are happening in society. There is no clarity about where to go. And all of the, all of the posturing and all of the statements that, hey, when we get into office, we'll do something that will solve the problem because we share your values, doesn't work. But the reason that it ultimately doesn't work is because they can't figure out how to do it. It's not that they're intrinsically bad, right? Why wouldn't they improve things if they knew how to improve things? And the answer is not because not necessarily because they disagree. It's actually because they're incompetent. But the incompetence is not about the individual. The incompetence is systemic. So you can't vote someone else into office. So as an example, in the US, right, there was Trump. Trump is incompetent. But what was Obama better? Was Bush better? And now with Biden, is it better now? And the answer is they don't know how to solve the problems that we're facing, including the most important problem in the last 100 years, which is the pandemic. So unfortunately, recognizing what we know, I've been working on building a public good system in the sense of these teams. I also don't know how to do this. I'm with you guys. I don't know how to do this, but there is no choice. We have to do it. We have to try it and make it work and be open to improvement, continuous improvement, figuring out how to change things, having it not work, and it takes time, and we're in a crisis, and we still have to do it, and this is what's happening. So I'm doing my best to learn how to build teams on the fly in a crisis. The system that we're building is called the World Health Network. And I just want to say I invite everyone to participate. Sahin has been joining for some of the meetings. But everyone is welcome. And the main point is we need a very diverse set of talents, including very much the private sector, the entrepreneur efforts. We are working on multiple efforts to scale up what we're doing because that's an essential part of this challenge. It has to be a whole of society effort. And there is no choice but to do this because the alternative, I hate to say this, many of you know, is a hell that we don't want to be in. We're already experiencing that hell, but it will only get worse. So I invite you, but I challenge you also, please find a way to participate. It is everyone's responsibility today to play a role in this. Please, Yaneer, is that how you pronounce your name?
Yeah, that's correct. That's correct. Hi, Yaneer. I'm just wondering, given your experience, I believe you've built plenty of teams. What are your biggest failures when you build the teams? Have you got an experience to share?
Yeah, it's very difficult. Again, one of the problems is to know what someone else can do. Because if you could do what they could do, they wouldn't be on your team. Now, but the point is that everyone is sufficiently different. I'll tell you a story. Many years ago, I realized that we needed an editor for our writings. It would really help us because doing the last step of editing took a long time. So I looked for an editor and I had several people interview. And when they interviewed, I spoke with each of them and I gave them a test. And in the end, the one that helped the most was someone that I couldn't understand what they were saying in the interview. I couldn't, really. I gave them the test, and within few minutes, they had edited a substantial scientific document. This was someone who was actually in law school at Harvard, but the ability to communicate was very minimal. But I would send her our papers, and she would send them back a few hours later, and they were always outstanding. I never had someone who did a better job than that. The point is that it's very hard to evaluate. The flip side also happens. You evaluate someone, you think you know, they're good, you bring them in, and they don't know what they're doing. They never show up.
It's quite difficult to map the competencies of people, right?
And part of it is not just the competence of the individual, but their competence in relation to others. So, so one of the statements, we have a paper also, the education of teams or something like that. It's very good to have teams that pre-exist to join the effort. And we know that, right? This is why we hire teams that are already in existence to do particular tasks, because they're able to do something that's effective. So integrating teams, but knowing how they integrate with others, it's not easy, right? Again, I told you it's complex, right? We know that. But those are examples of what I've learned. They're kind of obvious in terms of the context. But that doesn't mean that I gave you a solution to the problem. It's an awareness, however.
Yeah.
It's an awareness,
Thank you.
however, that that's a problem that gives you a fundamental solution, which is you have to constantly evaluate based upon what you want. And even then, you better be careful, because if you evaluate on your criteria, you may be throwing out people that are good because they're contributing in a different dimension. So it's not easy. And generally the people that can help the most are the people that you cannot understand, almost by definition.
Thanks for that, Yaneer and Yaneer. I think Fauna wrote down the question on the chat. I'm just reading that out, okay? Yaneer, please provide a bit more insights on how your work on system engineering applies to team building.
So the systems engineering work that I did was rooted in the fact that I was working with MITRE, which are the systems engineers for the US government. They do the biggest systems engineering projects. And they came to me with this problem about, you know, we just failed with this air traffic controller system upgrade. I don't know if you remember the situation. Air traffic control system had been developed in the 50s. By the 90s, by the knots, actually, it was way out of date, but they couldn't upgrade it. So they asked me, why did it fail? They set up an automation process. And basically, I explained to them that their process, which was a waterfall process, a centrally controlled, let's figure it out, design it and implement it and field it, doesn't work. So I explained to them, and it very much maps onto the, someone mentioned it earlier, this systems engineering of today, the, what is it called?
Agility.
Agile systems, right? There's this bunch of these terms. There are some other ones, but the basic point is that you have to deconstruct the process of engineering to a process which is not reliant on a central design. The question is, how do you create components that can change in the system and progressively improve the behavior of the system, rather than figuring it all out, telling people what to do, expecting all the pieces to come back and putting it together. And the answer has multiple layers. I hope that's an answer to your question. But the main thing is that it has to be done as teams. Ultimately, it has to be evolved rather than planned. And evolution means trying things. And the best way to do it is to try them in parallel, but that's also a big challenge to do it. So if you don't try it in parallel, well, then you'll be trying it out in parallel with other organizations that are trying things in parallel, right? Either you will win or they will win, but that's the evolutionary dynamic. It's a process of parallel trial and error, which is super important.
And Jim has a question.
Yaneer, can I just ask, when you were speaking about this, this is the way I understood it. Having awareness of yourself and the way that you come across, and and some people might call this emotional intelligence, and it can feel like a pseudoscience to a lot of people. But how can I say this? I've worked with a lot of brilliant jerks, very intelligent, competent people, but they are not alive or aware of how they come across, right? They're very difficult to work with. And so my question is, EQ, that emotional intelligence, is it as important as IQ when you're dealing with these types of complex problems in your view?
I have a colleague which was, let's say, very low on the EQ scale. And I worked with him many, many years ago, and we worked very well together. And then I found out that he became a very highly respected engineer at a very highly regarded institution. And I went to speak there, and I saw that he was the same, and everybody treated him with high respect. So the way I think about things is a little bit different. I think about it as the broader we can accommodate people, the better we can function if we can integrate them well. At the same time, we cannot guarantee that we can accommodate everyone. And so it's super important to recognize those boundaries. If something is not working, don't keep doing it. So the answer is, it would be great if we knew how to accommodate all possible people with all possible divergent talents into the system, but we can't. So focus on the context that you have, and don't try to do it beyond that. If someone is not working out, get someone else. If they're causing the system not to work, but that doesn't mean that it in principle isn't possible to do it. It just means that in practice, which is super important, that's not a good fit. It's nothing new that I'm saying.
No, thank you. I just wanted to add, in the agile community where we are, sometimes there's a little bit of a vibe of we should try to fix people. And I understand what you mean. We should work within boundaries, but I certainly don't aspire to be a therapist either. So I appreciate your realism. Thank you.
And again, the answer is, the best thing is to let people be who they are and to have the system be able to incorporate them. But that doesn't mean that that's possible.
Got it. Yeah. Thank you.
May I make a comment on this, also as a kind of a question, but also comment on this. I would think, speaking of IQ, EQ, or other dimensions of skills and competencies, we should not ideally mandate them that someone has near equal strength in every area. Just like we don't want everyone to be as competent on as competent on a technical area as on everything else, because we appreciate people being technically specialized. So some people may have a very high IQ, very low EQ. That person may not be the problem, but if in a team EQ is underrepresented, if there's a major area of skills or competencies that's missing from the team's overall blend, that is a fatal issue. The idea is to have all the relevant skills and competencies in the team as a mix, and try to achieve a state where they cooperate nicely in a mathematical synergy. And there's no exact solution to this. This is a very highly complex issue. There's no easy answer. How can we make this blend and fit?
One thing that I can say is that think in terms of the interface between people. You don't have to sit down in the same room together always. That's not how teams necessarily work. So the point is, like, I would email this person. I never met her, Never, ever. There are other people that I've never met that I've worked with. I barely spoke with her by phone. I don't know that I spoke with her any time after the first time I spoke with her. That wasn't the criteria for us to be able to work together. So think different, both in terms of the individuals, but also in terms of the way people interact with each other. But again, this is hard. This is not easy. I'm not saying that it's trivial by any means. We're coming toward the end, and I do want to stop at the hour because I have multiple things to do right now. But I want to bring to your attention, there is the course that we are holding. If you're interested, please join. I do think that given your interest, and it seems like you're very interested, there is an opportunity to go deeper in many different areas, not specifically this one, but the thinking of complexity science is really important for thinking about all of these issues in general. People who have taken it have liked it a lot.
And Yaneer, is there any other final message you'd like to share with the group before we close?
There's a very strong imperative in the society right now towards success. Please be aware that the imperative of success in the context of the economically driven society is causing failure of people to be able to live lives. And I think everyone should reevaluate the essential priorities. There is a crisis now that is costing people ability to think straight, to deal with the world, to have executive function. We knew, Nassim and I, and we wrote about this at the beginning of the pandemic. We have to be aware that a new disease can have all kinds of very bad consequences. And the wishful thinking that has been present and the lies that are continuing to be told about the consequences of getting this disease are hurting huge numbers of people, and it won't stop unless we stop it. So take good care of yourself. And again, the only way we're going to deal with this effectively is if we make teams. You're invited to participate, but I'm letting you know, if you don't do it, nothing that you work on in success is going to be worth very much. So I really think that the priorities should shift. And again, everyone is welcome. We're working extraordinarily hard to make this work. If you've worked hard on startups, you know what it's like. That's the atmosphere. You're welcome to join to the extent that you can. And I look forward to everyone participating, whether near or far. It's not the point. If you decide to join within local internal teams or in other efforts, find a way to contribute to the path forward.
Thanks a lot for sharing all of this, Yaneer, and joining today. And everyone, thanks a lot for joining as well. I'm going to stop recording now.